Hello, Professor Florian. Good morning.
Selamat pagi.
Selamat pagi. Please stand by for a moment. We're still finishing setting up for a little bit, and then
Sure. I will mute.
Right. Yeah. Thanks so much.
Tes 1 2. Apa? Iya, emang nggak di mute. Gue mau cek itu. Angel, tolongin dong. Ya satu-satu di bawah. Mic-nya cobain satu-satu di bawah dari clip on mic. Coba naik.
Clip on mic check. 1 check. Masuk ya?
Right. Lagi. Cek 1 2. Coba naik. Oh iya, ada dia.
وقع في المطار حتى عام 2006 لينتقل بعدها إلى العيش في نزل في باريس فرنسا عام 99. أيضا بطولة في الفيلم الممثل توم هانكس. حصل مهران على صفة لاجئ في فرنسا.
Si yang terlalu terutama dari depan dan keluar kita pasti.
Mana lagi? Dari mana ke mana? Kasur. Ini
Daftar yang seminar yang saya kirim ke grup itu via itu.
minum.
Karena kita buat ikon.
Did my voice come from?
Pokoknya setiap hari saya kirim terus, tapi saya juga lupa. Ada satu internasional seminar yang khusus pembangunan jaya. Oh, hari ini.
Suara aku masih. Padahal mati. Oh, mana dia?
Disampaikan ditunjukkan bahwa
Yes. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom. Om Swastiastu. Namo Buddhaya. Peace be upon us all. My name is Faris Gozi, and I will be your MC for today. Welcome, everyone, to the International Seminar, Urban Acupuncture, Social Environmentally Conscious Urban Design. In health of COVID protocols, I would like everyone to please stay seated and keep your mask on throughout the seminar. I would firstly like to welcome our guest speakers, Professor Florian Heinzelmann, joining us via Zoom, our guest speaker, Ms. Nadya Victoryka, our Dean of Technology and Design, Dr. Lucas Bilading Siombing, our Head of Architecture Program, Ibu Ratna Safitri, as well as our lecturers, students, and audience. I would also like to thank our sponsor of the PPKM grant from the Ministry of Education and Culture for supporting today's seminar. Before we start, let us thank God for the chance to be able to gather here today for this momentous event. Up next, let me start by going through today's rundown of events. We will first have singing of the national anthem Indonesia Raya, followed by our main program, an appreciation of certificates to our speakers, group documentation, and a closing of the program. For those who have just attended, please don't forget to scan the QR code for the attendance. And ladies and gentlemen, if I may ask everyone to please stand and sing our national anthem, Indonesia Raya. Thank you, everyone. Please be seated. Up next, allow me to introduce our moderator for today's seminar, Kaisa Tafrij. Kaisa is a lecturer in UPJ from the Faculty of Technology and Design, teaching Architecture Studio and Urban Design. Now, let's start our main event, the International Seminar, Urban Acupuncture, Social Environmentally Conscious Urban Design. Kaisa, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for the lovely introduction, and thank you for the warm welcome to all the audience here with us in the auditorium. Good morning once again, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to Professor Florian, who's joining us from Singapore at the moment, and Ibu Nadya here with us this morning, and all the audience who are tuning in via Zoom and also through YouTube live streaming. As has been introduced by Gozi, my name is Isa, and I am honored to be the moderator for today's international seminar, Urban Acupuncture, Socio-Environmentally Conscious Urban Design. This is particularly exciting for me because I teach urban design studies. There are some of my students here from the urban design studies class, and I am so happy to have this opportunity today to learn from both of these experts in urban design, Professor Florian and Ibu Nadya. So we're going to start right away, but before we go to Professor Florian's keynote session, please allow me to introduce him to those of you who are not yet familiar. So Professor Florian Heinzelmann is an associate professor in practice for the Department of Architecture, College of Design and Engineering, National University of Singapore. He obtained his doctorate degree from Eindhoven University of Technology in the Netherlands. He is also a practicing architect. He's the principal of Shaw. If you know, does anybody here know what Shaw is? Which he co-founded in 2009. And currently, Shaw has multiple offices, there's some in Rotterdam and in Bandung, and it also has won multiple awards, such as the Arch Daily Building of the Year Award, and was also shortlisted for the Aga Khan Award for Architecture. So it's a very accomplished architecture design studio. I hope some of you will have the opportunity to maybe intern there or work there upon your graduations, but you have to be really, really good. And Shaw mostly focuses in delivering exceptional design solutions while ingraining socio-environmental context in the design process. So this is a great opportunity for us here to learn from Professor Florian, and I am sure we are all super excited to hear Professor Florian's presentation. So I'm just reminding you all once again that we will have an opportunity for a question and answer session at the end of Professor Florian's presentation. And I really encourage all students to take this opportunity. This is a rare opportunity to learn from one of the best urban designers, one of the best architects we have ever invited to our university. So this is such a good opportunity. And I hope all of you, most of you really, all of you can ask questions. And if you're not comfortable with asking in English, you can say it in Indonesian, and our lovely MC Gozi will help me translate it to Professor Florian and vice versa. So there's no pressure. I'm sure Professor Florian also speaks some Indonesians, don't you? Having lived in Indonesia
sedikit
for a while. Yeah, so just don't worry about the language barrier. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask your questions. Now, please give your warmest welcome to Professor Florian Heinzelmann.
Terima kasih.
You can start whenever you're ready, Professor Florian.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for your very kind introduction. Very professional. I'm very amazed. Also, your English is amazing. It sounds like you're from the UK. So I can't do this because I'm German, so you will have to bear with my German accent, unfortunately. So can you please enable screen sharing for me? Yeah, now it should work. So I hope you see my first screen. Do you?
Yes, we do.
Okay, excellent, excellent. So yeah, selamat pagi. I hope you're all doing fine. Thank you very much for inviting me. I hope I will make it in 60 minutes. If not, and I'm too long, please cut me short and remind me. So, I mean, the theme today is urban acupuncture. And I call my lecture Socio-Climatic Design because this is also partly what I'm actually teaching at NUS. Maybe not so much focused on the urban part, more on architecture. However, I will show a couple of projects. One is covering the acupuncture part, which is mostly the microlibraries, which you might know in some public space projects like the Taman Film in Bandung. And for the urban part, I will show Huma Betang Umay, our competition entry for the vice presidential palace on Kalimantan. So yeah, you already mentioned it very nicely, a little bit about my background, but I think it's also important to mention that, you know, I'm co-founder of Schau together with Daliana Suryawinata, and in Germany we have Tobias Hoffmann. So we both did diploma together at the University of Applied Sciences in Munich, and together with Daliana, I was studying at the Berlage Institute, where we both obtained our master degree. So in a way, you see, we have all these big names in our portfolio, like Andra Martin, MBRDV, UN Studio, West 8, OMA, TU Delft, and so on and so forth. So yes, we used our time in the Netherlands. I mean, I'm originally German. Of course, for me, going over the border is not so exciting as for Daliana coming from Jakarta to the Netherlands. But, you know, we used our time there to gain a lot of experience in these very well-known offices. And that's not for the sake only of having it in the portfolio, but really you learn a lot there and a lot of interesting things and very cutting edge approaches towards architectural design. So if you have ever the chance to study abroad or go abroad, please do so. Apply for scholarships, maybe get some working opportunity experiences within Indonesia, and then apply and try to broaden your knowledge. It's helpful. You know, it's also, you know, it works both ways. So, and in 2009 we started then Schau, started PhDs in Delft, Eindhoven, and since 1.5 years I'm professor at the NUS Department of Architecture, and Daliana is working at Future Cities Laboratory as well while we are running Schau in parallel. And with that, I also would like to thank our team, which is still in Bandung. You know, without them and without having the possibility with Zoom, you know, we wouldn't be there where we are right now. So socio-climatic design, in a way, if you look here at the map, you know, I'm coming from Germany. Daliana comes from Jakarta. We both met in the Netherlands. Netherlands very rainy, slightly cold in Rotterdam all the time. We have 4 seasons in Europe: spring, summer, autumn, and winter. And in Indonesia, or in a tropical region between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn, you have a entirely different climate, maybe 2 seasons. In Singapore, it's maybe a little bit more often rainy monsoon than it is in Indonesia. But here the climate is defined by dry periods, dry season, and rainy season is completely different. And in a way, that also leads to a little bit of entirely different behavior of people, how they work, how they have a lifestyle, how they interact with each other, so the whole social component. And of course, coming from the Northern Hemisphere and then coming to Indonesia, having been living there for 6 years and now in Singapore, I also had to do a lot of unlearning, relearning, rethinking our architectural practice in a way, simply because the cultures are different, the cultures of building, and let's say a very formalized rational approach, which you maybe learn in Germany or the Netherlands, does not necessarily apply in a sort of more informal economy and way of how people do architecture and execute architecture in Indonesia. So I find this actually quite interesting. Also, you will see later in terms of architectural culture and vernacular architecture. This is a slide I always show my students in the beginning of the semester. And this is an early photo from the pandemic, which was going around in diverse WhatsApp groups in Indonesia. And, you know, people who are supposed to social distance are not doing it. They're mingling partly without masks, but you see already the issue. Because a lot of people were sending this around as a joke and ha 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 and kampung guys and so on and so forth. But actually what we see here is a really, really basic design problem. You know, of course, they're putting their shoes as a placeholder, but, you know, it's a climatic problem. People always gather where it is comfortable, right? So they're sitting in the shade and they're sitting there. They would be in the sun, would heat up and would have no space to sit. So if you want people to behave accordingly, the first thing you need to do is, you know, to enable a certain level of comfort for them. And as you see here, with some umbrellas and some stools, it would have been easily solved, or would be better. It would maybe not solve complete the social interaction because you're queuing, but I mean, for that reason, it's also called social distancing. It's meant to be like that. But, you know, if you don't provide the basics, then people won't obey your rules. And, you know, in Indonesia, is especially, how to say, yeah, people are not necessarily always following laws if nobody's looking. It's a little bit different here in Singapore. Also, what I often show is, you know, the very basics. And forgive me if you know it already, of course, but it's just maybe a reminder, refresher. So, I mean, our planet is orbiting the sun in 1 year and has a tilt around which it spins. And this tilt is fixed while orbiting. That means, like in summer, you have a different angular relationship in this rotational tilt towards the sun than you would have in winter, right? And what does this mean? So for a place where I come from, like in Germany or the Netherlands, you see that if we take the perpendicular towards this point where I'm standing and project the sun angle, I have a relatively high sun altitude in summer and a relatively low sun altitude in winter. But in both cases, the sun always comes from south, right? But in winter, it's cold. I would like to utilize the sun, maybe for passive heat gains. And in summer, I would like to block the sun because it's also getting around 30 degrees, and in recent years, even more, thanks to climate change in Germany. So, but I can already design with these angles and have a big influence on climatic design and comfort in the building. And also energy usage. You know, if I can block, then I do not need that much of air conditioning or heating in winter. Now, if you go to Indonesia, you know, it's an entirely different story because it's almost at the equator. Parts of it are at the equator, say Kalimantan and Java is a little bit south, but it's true for both cases. So if you look and you place yourself here vertically and you look at the sun angles, then I have in June, I have the sun coming from north, and in December, I have sun coming from south, right? But sort of the bandwidth of these angles is really overhead coming from the zenith. So meaning I have a completely different combination of angular relationship of the sun angle also in relationship to the climate, because most of the time I would like to shade the building, and I have different possibilities to do so. So architecture, the form of architecture needs to react towards that. And again, if you look at the overview, you see it here, the sun path at the equator, you have it from both sides. Where I come from, only from south, and if you would go, for instance, to Australia, you would have the sun coming from the north instead of the south. So really, it is really important where you operate on the planet and what sort of climatic strategy for comfort and livability you're applying. And that's not only to do with the sun angle, but of course, in the larger sense, we have different climatic zones on the planet. Whereas, for instance, the hot desert climate is much more severe, I would argue, than the tropical climate, which we have in Indonesia and Singapore. And of course, the humid continental climate, which is in parts of Germany and the Netherlands, is again completely different with the 4 seasons. So this needs to be kept in mind. But interestingly, this also leads to different building typologies and behavior, which we see in a second in these different countries, as an example with vernacular architecture. So again, this is a nice homepage which you should have a look at, andrewmarsh.com. You can upload your 3D files there and check your sun paths, and you see again, this is in Munich, relatively low in December and relatively high sun and altitude in June. But in December, we have there less than 12 hours sunlight, basically more 6 hours, versus in summer, we have a much longer daylight. And that leads also to a complete different behavior, because of course in winter we are more inside, it's raining, it's snowing, it's cold, but a lot of people appreciate the summers, going to the beer garden, sitting outside, want to sit underneath the trees. So it's a completely different behavior of using spaces, using outdoor places, using the city, in comparison to, let's say, Indonesia, right? Because if you look, you have throughout the year, you have, doesn't matter, the sun is rising around 6 and going down around 6, you have all the time, 12-hour sunlight, right? In that sense, this sunlight is not changing your behavior much as people, because it's the same throughout the year. For instance, if a small son, and if you want to bring the kid to bed, it's entirely different story in Europe than in Indonesia, because in Rotterdam, the sun was going down roughly 10:30. You have like full daylight in 10:30 around 21st of June, and then tell the kid, who is maybe 5 years old, you have to go to bed now, and just looks outside the window and says like, but it's still bright there. You won't have this issue in Indonesia, because throughout the whole year it's going to be the same. And just as a comparison, if you go to the North Pole, maybe you have remembered the horror movie from a while ago, 28 Days Later, right? You have parts of the year in summer, 21st of June, where the sun is never setting. It's like 24 hours bright, but then other parts of the year where the sun would need to shine through the planet, which obviously is not possible. You have eternal night. So how do we design that? And again, one of these design tools which you can have a look is the psychrometric chart, which in a way maps relative humidity from 100%, 90, 80, 70, 60, 50, and so on and so forth, to, in this case, dry bulb temperature, 0 degrees, 20 degrees, 25, and 30. So what it does with this mapping is describing a zone of comfort where humans feel comfortable, and then in blue, it's mapped out throughout the year how many hours it is sitting in which zone. So in generally speaking, there is of course some differences in the clothing factor. What are you wearing? How warm are you packed in or insulated? And what is your activity level, your metabolic equivalent? How much do you move around? But in general, humans feel comfortable between 20 degree in the range from 80 to 20% relative humidity, and that goes up to 25%. And if it goes warmer, you need to reduce humidity. So the hotter and the more moist, the less comfortable people are feeling. But you see then in this printed chart, if it goes winter and gets colder, then you could have here, you could heat the house with internal gains, which is sort of what a passive house is doing. And of course, the passive house is stretching this internal gain window even further because it's highly insulated. passive solar heat gains with sun and trompe walls, and then solar active, for instance, with collectors, and then it goes to heating. If we go then into comfort zone, in summer we have above 30 degrees, but because it's not so super moist, we can work with mass cooling, meaning the thermal mass of the building is sort of charging the high dense material like concrete or stones like a battery. And if the wall is thick enough, the heat will be released in a delay, for instance, in the night when it's anyway cooling down. So this sort of mass cooling is a lot what you would do in sort of dry, arid desert climates. Looking at buildings and the vernacular, so this is sort of a typical farmhouse and it's built in a very specific way as such, is that, for instance, this is the southern side. I mean, of course, relatively small windows because glass was expensive, but using full log material, meaning wood is a very good insulator and delays the heat exchange between inside and outside, especially in winter. Now, on the other side, on the northern side, you have, for instance, then the stables where the cows and the cattle is located, and in a way, you know, it's cold there. The sun is never shining there, but in winter, this becomes like almost like a secondary heating system because, you know, all these cows and cattle are radiating a lot of heat. West side is usually the weather side, which is like, you know, you want to pull down, also get rid of the snow and rain, similar to Indonesia, let's say. But, you know, in a way, through certain material available in this case in the Alps, you know, you have stone, you have forest, the environment is already providing you with the right material to build there. Now, if you go, for instance, Singapore, also Indonesia, tropical rainforest climate, you see the window or the hours plotted are completely in one range, in one zone. So if you take Germany before, it was sort of more or less all over the place, but it was more in this sort of zone on the left. But now if you look Indonesia and the tropical climate, you have, you know, a lot of moisture and a lot of high temperature. So what can you do there? I mean, of course, if it gets hotter and you know, up to 100% air conditioning and dehumidification is always working, but of course that costs you energy and is not the most sustainable solution. But you can also look here in this window, so you can increase this comfort zone if you shade and use natural ventilation. And to no surprise, I mean, if you look at traditional and vernacular architecture in Indonesia and in Malaysia, of course, in Indonesia, it's called Rumah Panggung and not Rumah Penghulu, but it's a similar typology where you, for instance, have this house on stilts, where then you have shutters which you can close in case of rain, but you have a lot of permeability, thin floor plans, not too deep, where there is a lot of cross ventilation, possibility for stack effect, getting the moisture out of the building, but also having shades and overhang, you know, to make it more comfortable for people at times when there was no air conditioning. And I must say now I'm living in Singapore, and Singapore is roughly the same temperature range like Jakarta. And Jakarta, I thought like I can not live, you know, without air conditioning, because previously I've been living in Bandung, and as you know, Bandung is 700,000 meters high up, and it's nicely cool there. It's even so cool for some people that they wear jackets when they ride their motorcycles because they start freezing. So, but you know, in Singapore, I can very easily live without air conditioning if I have, let's say, enough airflow. And I did some measurements, like if it's 1.5 meters per second, even if it's 30 degrees outside and I'm inside, I have cross ventilation and sitting in the shade, it's perfectly fine and comfortable for me. So I think if we build smarter and maybe take some concepts from vernacular architecture, we can build much more sustainable and provide this sort of climatic comfort. But you see already, I mean, we're talking about social climatic spaces. This sort of architecture here is also built around the sort of social interaction. You have the semi-outdoor space where in some cases, you know, you can sit and mingle. In other cases, you kept your cattle. And if you look around the whole, you know, Indonesian archipelago, we have this sort of house on stilts. Very often, of course, you know, the tropical architecture is the architecture, the aesthetics of the roof. It even has, in some cases, implications on certain spirituality, how the cosmos is perceived. But in a way, it's very interesting how a sort of tradition of shipbuilding, timber construction evolved in different places around the Indonesian archipelago in different ways. But it's always building up on this idea of cross ventilation, rain protection, shading, and so on and so forth. So in that sense, I would argue, if you look at vernacular architecture, that a certain region or place on our planet, which has a certain climate, already provides you with the appropriate building material, right? So in the Alps, you have stones and trees. In Indonesia, in the tropics, you have fast-growing plants. You can use bamboo, wood, rattan, and whatnot. And if you go to, let's say, a desert climate, you have rocks, adobe, and bricks, let's say, which has a high thermal mass. And you know, this sort of material climate leads to a certain culture, to a certain society, to certain build forms and certain techniques how to build this architecture. That's sort of like this whole, I don't know, circular relationship where one is, of course, not quite sure what is influencing what, you know. But I personally imagine that it's sort of like a process over time where people start to adjust, develop their techniques, but then develop also with the techniques their building typologies, the way how they start interacting. Sort of, it's a look at back and forth how this all influences each other. And of course, with technical achievements like air conditioning, and Singapore is called the air-conditioned country, all of a sudden the whole usage of buildings can change in a complete way. The same like how electricity and the introduction of electric light changed completely the usage of our cities. Nonetheless, I do want to stress that having a look at this vernacular architecture can be a great source of learning. However, this is always like a discussion we have with other architects. How much does Indonesian architecture need to look Indonesian or be inspired or being referring to this vernacular? In our opinion, you know, building needs to perform. Tropical does not necessarily have to look tropical. So yeah, so we were able with Xiao to develop a couple or realize a lot of projects in the recent years, from public spaces, Alun-Alun Cicendo, to small commercial places in Semarang, to our micro libraries, Alun-Alun Kejaksan, Misbah, you know, a lot of different things. And so how do we translate this you know, socio-climatic design approach? And one of our earlier projects, which was already realized 2014 for Ridwan Kamil when he became mayor, is Taman Film, because this is, I think, a very good example of this socio-climatic space, and of course urban acupuncture, because back in the day, or you must imagine, if you start as a mayor in Bandung, which is also the capital in a way of West Java, so there is only a certain amount of things you can touch as a mayor, because some like of these streets here, these roads, they are under the jurisdiction of the governor. So you know, implementation of certain things is relatively complicated. So what Ridwan Kamil did is you know, to work on public spaces and touch up certain places. And so the Taman Film, the Pasupati flyover was like a desolate place, and then with putting or asking different people, partly also his staff, to design a sequence of public spaces underneath the Pasupati, and we were asked to do Taman Film. And what we are quite fascinated about is, we learned a little bit from the alun-alun, where the main mosque is in Bandung, and this artificial lawn material. And it turned out to become actually a what we call an urban living room with this sort of small intervention, and it attracts a lot of people because, with this material, people start taking off their shoes. It triggers a behavior. If it would be just grass or natural materials, then probably it wouldn't be that much regarded. So in a way, by choosing an artificial material, which reminds people much more of a carpet rather than grass, they take off their shoes and they treat it as a living room, because waste is an issue, waste management and people throwing things away in Indonesia. But here, this is astonishingly always relatively clean. Then in the same time, having the pasupati, the flyover, as a sort of roof, and a really wide and open view, as well as air circulation to the side, becomes really a comfortable space. And in a way, this is a mix of found condition, which we in a way exploited, but then also design approach that we, for instance, didn't want to have only, let's say, parallel seating towards the screen, but we started to make this circular little pockets where then people can either decide, if you sit, for instance, here, you sit alone, you're facing outward, or you sit in a pocket, you're facing inward, and you can form small groups. So in a way, this thing works quite nice if it's not raining too strongly, because rain won't hit that much. So you're pretty much protected, and it's really a space for social interaction, and kids to play, and people felt safe. So you see, they put their babies inside this sort of little pockets, and it's quite a well used and well perceived space in Bandung. And here this was, I lost it, I think 2016, if I'm not mistaken, or 2015, when Bandung won the football cup. So people went really crazy and occupied the whole Taman film for live streaming, live watching, Persib playing finals. The other thing is, of course, what we have is the micro libraries, and I want to show you 3 examples. And our mission or our idea is to have more micro libraries, or as many as possible we can build over Indonesia. And so, because literacy rate is okay, but the interest in reading is not so fantastic. As you probably know, reading during your school time was some form of punishment. So the issue is, if you have a city library, the threshold might be too high because it's very institutional. People do not want to go there, and it's maybe a bit far away. You need to drive. If you would have, on the other hand, a mobile library, which there are a couple of initiatives, especially in Bandung, or we know of, then of course it provides books, but it's very utilitarian. It does not provide really that much of an identity. So we decided, okay, we want to be somewhere in between a mobile library and a city library, with this having a lot of smaller libraries within the city, because if with Taman Bima, with the ice cream bucket library, and also with Barakayu, and also with the Hanging Gardens, it becomes somewhat a little bit iconic, right? And with this iconicity, you have this sort of, maybe you could call it even micro Bilbao effect. So I don't know if you know Bilbao before the museum was built by Gary. It was not on the map, and then all of a sudden, now you build this museum, it becomes a tourist attraction. We don't want to go that far and say it becomes a tourist attraction, but building a micro library by this insertion in a very small spot, you create an identity for the neighborhood, a meeting point, and point of pride and identification. In that sense, an iconic building can contribute and help tremendously. Also, what is very important if you do these micro libraries, and now we come back to the social aspect, and don't want to talk so much now about the climatic aspect because this always has to work in a way, but how to initiate it and how to have this microlibrary running. So you need a strong community and you need somebody who's staffing the library, but it also needs to be supervised and these people need to be, taught. So we always work together with funding partners and NGOs. And, over the years, we have some more successful and some less successful libraries, and it's an interesting learning process because this is also something I at least underestimated coming from Europe because, a lot of people, they're active in clubs, training kids on a Saturday playing football, or they are in reading clubs and stuff like this. But since we are very affluent in Europe, we can afford it. So you need to be able to afford volunteering. Your belly must be first full before you do this. And when we worked, let's say in Indonesia with volunteers, there's always also an interest of sort of making money and making living. So for instance, our microlibrary Hanging Gardens in Bandung, they turned it into a cafe, and all of a sudden it was more cafe than library, right? So you need to integrate and start changing your mindset a little bit. In case of Varakayu in Semarang, there was already a charity and organization feeding the poor, and they very much liked the library as almost like a new headquarters, right? They were already busy. So you need always to think about the whole social layer, the whole social construct when establishing a microlibrary in terms of maintenance, in terms of construction, in terms of especially who is doing the activities and who is manning or staffing the library to make it work. So, I mean, this is a sort of a rough diagram, but, every time we build a microlibrary, design a microlibrary, this needs to be filled in freshly and newly. There is no one general approach which always works. So we have to be very contextual and site-specific with designing them, not only in architectural form, but also how this whole construct of people behind can work together. So the three projects, one is not a microlibrary, this is a Beats House, but this is a sort of very influential, still influential work. Then Taman Bima, then Selasa and Barakayu. I want to show there also a little bit sort of the construction and the socio-climatic spaces, how we see this. So the House Without Doors was a competition for a young architect in Jakarta in 2011, so maybe 2 years after we started. And we came up with this Beats House because we were thinking, okay, if you have a house in a tropical climate, and if you could somehow, of course, get rid of the mosquitoes, you would actually not need at all any doors or anything, right? So, of course, if you could sort of have a satpam sitting there and controlling who goes in, you don't need any facade either. So the whole idea was to have a floating roof sitting on 4 pylons, and all the program inside the house is sort of defined by more or less density of sort of glass pearl curtains hanging. So you basically can walk into this house wherever you want. So you have a higher density around the bathroom, a little bit more density towards the garden on that side. This is relatively open, but you can always go through. And this whole idea is, as long as I'm protected from the rain, as long as I'm shaded, and as long as I have enough cross ventilation, which the Beats can do, I can live perfectly fine, right? And this, of course, in a way is opposing, even not entirely aesthetics, but some form of modernist idea where you have always this very thin glass layer. If you take the Farnsworth house, let's say, the continuity of the garden. So we are much more working with the idea of the veil, the idea of the curtain, the idea of the layering of different densities, of different degrees of permeability. In that sense, modernism is always like either or condition between like completely transparent or completely opaque. And we think in a tropical climate, also in certain also Indonesian culture, sort of the layeredness, the degree of privacy can be sort of manipulated with the with a sort of more flexible material, more ambiguous material. And a lot of this comes back in our microlibraries and other projects. So you see here, this is the model with the beads, and we started to try to weave different patterns, and actually we just started stacking it, and then it became a high rise. Still something I would love to build at a certain moment in some degree in Indonesia. But this is now a building we're designing for Batam, for an office for a shipyard, with a canteen on the ground floor. And you see, like, I mean, it's not beads, but you know, this idea of permeability and this lamellas rotating according to the sun angle, integration of green, and having all the liminal spaces, all the circulation on the outside as a buffer for the spaces on the inside to be more protected from the rain, even though having a lot of cross ventilation and shade. This sort of lightness is something we would like to very much achieve in architecture. And with that, of course, you have a different degree of social interaction and possibility for people. So the microlibrary Bima in Bandung, coming now to a bit of the urban acupuncture part of the lecture, is actually a quite interesting situation, because not far away here is also Alun-Alun Cicendo. The whole neighborhood is defined in a way by scooter and small motorcycle mechanics and spare parts and steel industry. But if you go along the Jalan Bima, you have the Taman Bima, this sort of horseshoe-shaped park. And you can already read it here from the building mass. So you have actually the kampong on one side, and you have middle-class houses on the other side. So that leads to a somewhat bizarre and potentially conflict situation, because actually the whole Taman, where you can play football and so on and so forth, is actually catering for all the people from that side, versus structurally is much more embedded through the street, separating these two sides into the middle class, which is actually not so much participating in this public space. So of course there were some questions in the beginning from the residents, can people who go to the library look into my front yard? And they were afraid of things got stolen. But in a way, with the facade design and sort of like framing with the small buckets, we think it works quite well. But this is also something in terms of urban acupuncture, where you have to be aware of that your intervention redirects literally streams of people, and not always for the better. So you have to be really sure that it can improve. Part along the river here, I mean, you probably know how kampongs look like, but this is something, when we show these projects also to a international audience, we need to explain a little bit what are the living conditions and how do people live in Indonesia, because they're not so familiar with that. And on the other side is the middle class housing. So we took an existing stage which was used by the community, and we remodeled it. We didn't want to throw it away, and then we started to build our pylons, where we then have or our columns, where we then have the floating microlibrary as a rumah panggung, house on stilts, above it. So the reason why we did this as our first typology was frankly not so much because we wanted to relate to these Indonesian vernacular typology, but in a way it was very pragmatic, because if we would have put it on the ground, we either would have to take away the football field in front, or we have to take away the stage where people are meeting. So, and by elevating it above the stage, we sort of generate the semi-outdoor space, which is then usable. We don't take away, we're adding value to the place. And later on, with discussion and giving presentations and lectures, we sort of understood actually that we quite organically, in a way, reinvented, maybe even if you want to say so, a Indonesian vernacular typology. So the buckets are all sort of tilted. You have cross ventilation. The stage is rain protected and shaded underneath, so it becomes truly a multifunctional building. And if you look on the inside, you see all the buckets. They filter very nicely the light. they reduce the heat gain. Cross ventilation is still possible. If it rains too hard, then all the rain will be blown inside. Therefore, we have these translucent polycarbonate sliding doors. But in general, if it's just a little bit of a drizzle, the rain goes into the buckets and then can run out to the outside. The closed buckets, they have little holes down there. The water can run away. In that sense, what I want to say is it becomes like a sort of also a daylighting device, because what the buckets do quite nicely with this 1 millimeter thick translucent plastic is, diffuse the light in the interior and spread it very nicely. So you have good readability. You don't need so much electricity while operating the library, because the readability of and daylighting, natural lighting of the library is quite good, quite effective. So, and during the night when you turn on the light, it becomes a lantern, so it works exactly the other way around. So how you have the lighting situation on the inside and during day, so it starts to radiate to the outside and becomes this little Bilbao effect, beacon of knowledge for the neighborhood, and contributes greatly to the identity. And this whole public space and library is then also used for, let's say, regular clinic where you can go for your health checkup, you bring your baby and you weigh it there, and all these sort of activities, and here as a social interaction, how it is used for events and clubs, and how it is as well. Now, Microlibrary Salazar, this is a little bit of a sad story. This is in Bojanegoro. It was sponsored back then by an oil company, let's say, and was initiated by Kangyoto. But when the next region came, she decided to tear this microlibrary away. So it was never in operation, but a different situation in terms of urbanistically speaking, because this is in a park. So we have these two different types of microlibraries. One is sort of more an urban dense situation like Taman Bima, Varakayu, but then we have those in the park like Lancia and Salazar. And of course, the park library, you can play much more with the surrounding in a way, sort of to let that in. And there's a lot of other facilities, so you cater a little bit for a different context. This park in Bojanegoro is very nice, and it's very nicely maintained. So we decided to work more with these park features. And if you go, and you're Indonesian, obviously, you know the Salazar typology, for instance, in universities, you have always this covered walkway when it's raining. You can go from building to building, staying dry, and if the sun is shining, you're shaded and is somewhat comfortable, but then you're able to go through this campus as a pedestrian without having to jump into your car. So we decided to use this liminal space idea to wrap it around a tree and use this as a sort of buffer zone and insert the library in the inside. So basically, you can see this building either as like a box, but you could also see it, and that's how we do it, is actually the library with a very big roof overhang, which becomes a veranda where you can then use this sliding doors to block the sun if required. But you can use this as a space of social interaction and also reading. So that the liminal space, the Salazar, becomes literally a social space of interaction, while you always have cross ventilation. So it's the photo. Library was never opened. So all the bookshelves, the backrests of the benches you see here become the bookshelves. Everything is oriented to the inside and also closable, that if it rains and if it would really rain too strong, that this is still protected. But for that, we also have this wooden deck on the outside, that this is really the buffer zone. If it's raining, that the water can sort of seep through and go into the ground. So we were working with a spanduk. So we made this facade mock-up. This is also something we always want to think about, the sort of materiality, how to work with different materials in a new way. So you see this was the first strip we folded in the office, and put together with stapler pins. We made 2 of them, and basically this, the other one is just Photoshop. But you see the effect it's doing. So that the way how we folded it is also in response to the local climate and the rain, because it's always folded over and over and over and over. That means, like, if it's raining and it would be the other way around, water would creep inside here. But since it's the overlap, like syrup tiling, you know, it's always overlapping to the outside, and rainwater is never staying inside, and thus less mold. But then you have also this, if you look here, you see it's slightly 100% transparency, then double overlap, less transparent or less light transmittant, and then where there's a single layer, you have more light transmittant. So you have this pattern also, you know, visible in the inside and outside, and it's filtering the light nicely. So yeah, finally you have the microlibrary Varakayu, which was built in Semarang in 2020, and it's sort of, I think it's the first mass engineered timber building, also FSC certified Forest Stewardship Council in Indonesia, which was done together with Kayu Lapis Indonesia. I mean, this was really a project we had really great joy in designing and executing, because it has a certain level of precision and craftsmanship through the factory of Kayu Lapis, which we really very much appreciate. So we learned, of course, from Bima with having the house on stilts, that it can generate us a space underneath, which can be then used for something else, sort of more informal than only the library itself. And if you look at the sort of insertion, the acupuncture within the urban or the context of the neighborhood, it's a little bit different than Bima, because Bima is really just the neighborhood. With Varakayu being here, this busy Jalan Dr. Sutomo, it becomes much more exposed, and also with the food court and the cafe on top and a bus stop, it is much better embedded in a way in the urban fabric. So this bus is, I think, for free, if I'm not mistaken, for the people to use. And it is part of the sort of domestic sort of tourism route through Semarang. So in that sense, the library is contributing to sort of the larger part of the city, but with having the hospital, the Kampung Pilangi, and that side, and some elementary school, it also contributes very much to the neighborhood. Now, we don't have any toilets or any other than water for watering the plants. We don't have anything there, because the food court, in a way, is providing that. And I think this is also like sort of with urban acupuncture, you know, you don't have to provide everything all the time. The idea is also to have sort of synergies with the surrounding and see what they are offering and sort of participating, yeah, like I said, creating synergies. So that's the view towards the Kampung Pelangi. And the way we designed it is, you know, in a way, completely bottom up, meaning we didn't have in the beginning this idea of, yeah, let's make the icon and let's call it Varak Kayu in relationship to the Varak Ngendok, the icon of Semarang, but it happened sort of the other way around. So we were looking in what materials does the factory provide, what manufacturing possibilities do they have, and from there we started to develop the whole design from out the material and manufacturing possibilities. We came up with this Brisolated deep screen from Zollinger Construction, which is a German construction principle from the 1920s, which we thought is quite interesting and adequate, because it's sort of a reciprocal system where one board holds two other boards, holds two other boards, holds two other boards, and they're just bolted together with bolts. And in a way, it represents very well a sort of more industrialized timber architecture rather than pure craftsmanship. And while we were designing this, then we discovered actually these diamonds look like scales, and the scales could relate to the local icon of Semarang. Hence, we named it Varak Kayu from the Varak depth. So this becomes part of the storytelling, and this part of the narrative is very important to also sort of anchor the building in the minds of the people. Yeah, so while designing this, of course, we had look of how dense does this facade screen needs to be, how deep is it. We did some shadow studies. The lighting studies I did later with simulations in Climate Studio to show to my students. But in response of building the orientation and where the sun is coming from different times of the day, how is the screen performing as a sort of evaluation afterwards, which I like to show to my students. Because what you want to have is you want to have enough light inside the building that you can read without artificial light. You don't want to have direct light inside the building because otherwise it heats up, it becomes too hot, and you want to have enough cross ventilation to keep you cool, but then also the possibility for closing if the rain is too strong, because nonetheless with this rain overhang, if there's a tropical rainstorm, it's getting completely wet inside. So that see the transparency during normal operation, the multifunctional play space underneath. So the idea is that we always integrate some play features. In this case, it's a swing, which I had in my kindergarten times. It was shaped like a dragon. So again, it fits a little bit with the Baragendok as sort of a dragon-like creature with a dragon swing interaction via the net up and down, so that people who read can see people who play. So a very playful way and very interactive, part of the architecture. Using the stairs also for the possibility to watch movies, use it as a small amphitheater, being able to pull down a screen and make projections, the inside. And you see here then these curtains as a third layer almost, because the first would be the roof overhang, the second is the facade, and the third layer is these curtains, which then also enable people to close it during night, that less dust gets in. But if the rain is too much, and enable operability. And finally, here are images of interaction of the people, how they use it. So it's quite interesting to see how it is occupied and used by people and the visitors, and of course becomes then part of social media and this sort of things. So are you guys still with me? I think I have 15 minutes, right? Or am I too long already?
Yes, there's still some times. Are you almost finished, or are you
No,
still...
so I want to, I think I can make it in 15 minutes.
Yeah, sure, okay.
Yeah, okay, cool. So yeah, okay, this is now the part of the acupuncture in a way, and I hope I could show you sort of this idea of the comfort, the comfortable climatic condition where then people start being able to interact as a sort of establishing the social climatic space, as well as with this idea of the acupuncture, that you have sort of very simple local insertions. So I want to go now into a bigger project. Oh, forgot that one, sorry. So to summarize actually our work, so Bima, Salazar and Barakayu, sort of that these buffer zones, these spaces and liminal spaces become these sort of flexible spaces. They're partly facade, they're partly roof overhang, they're partly climatic spaces in a way to improve the climate, but at the same time they become extremely flexible space, especially for human interaction, because they'll be occupied not all the time, right? So the function of the library sits here or in between, but then you have these spaces of being sandwiched or at this periphery. So this is something which we really like to think about and design a lot in our architecture. And you remember maybe back the Batam shipyard building, where we then have sort of stretch around where if it's raining, it's not so problematic because the rain doesn't go to the core programs, but here and then if it's raining, it's simply not as occupied or occupied differently. So now going to Uma Betang Umai, our Wakil President design for the new capital. It goes a little bit away from the urban acupuncture, but I would say this is in a way a very urban, even though it's an architectural design competition, it has to follow a lot of urban design principles, because in a way it is about accessibility, public space, how do people get in and outside this complex, how is it accessible via public transport, public green, and of course climatic design aspects play a major role. So we won with another office second prize for this, and to be frank, I don't know how this project is going to develop further. It's not so easy not having one winner but two, and having this sort of negotiation. So we will see. So I will just present you now our design ideas and design principles behind Uma Betang Umai, and see, hopefully this video is working well.
Professor Florian.
Does this video has no sound, or
Oh,
we can't really hear anything? I mean,
okay. Yeah, then I'm sorry. So I would suggest you will look it up on YouTube. We have it there too. I will send you the link after. Let me look up for the link, and then you can have a look. Then I will just explain it. So yeah, the new vice presidential palace idea. So what was important for us, of course, is again the whole idea about the sustainability. So the whole location is, monoculture of palm trees. There's some natural forests left. So the idea of a carbon neutral building, if not carbon positive, hinges around sort of the absorption of CO2, right? And now the question, if you build a new palace or a new city, even in a new location, you have a lot of building materials which you have to ship over, and you have to make up for it. And therefore the whole landscaping and deforestation is really part of the design strategy. Also, the idea of producing electricity, and I will show the example of the School of Design and Environment here at NUS, the newly built SDE4. But the whole idea behind this palace is like, how can we tie into this whole master plan from Urban Plus, which is playing a lot of with regenerative technology, green energy, but also public transportation, and reducing of our CO2 footprint. So as a inspiration or design input, inspiration I don't like so much, but more of the design input was looking into longhouse, a sort of local typology, terracing of the landscape, and heterogeneous forests in place of monoculture, which is depleting the soil. But that also leads to a better climate. It also leads to better water management, and also integration of not only flora but also local fauna, which maybe is not that much present anymore. Of course, we can debate this. This can be a little bit tricky at times if you have all elements inside your house or your building, but nonetheless. So as a part of Architecture Nusantara, you always deal with this idea of the feet, the body, and the head. And in this case, we implemented these arches, which we saw in the local longhouse, diagonal longhouse typology, but in a way we reworked that. So I think as architect, we have the freedom and also the obligation to not just blindly follow a certain typology, but to rework it and make it work, and take what we think is good. In this case, you have the porches, you have this sort of open house idea, and the openness is very important. Of course, if you sit on this top of the hill, it become again iconic and very visible. And we had in the recent presentations a lot of discussion about the roof. And I hope to refrain afterwards in this Q&A from this discussion. I am not willing to discuss it anymore, because we make a flat roof, because simply we have the possibility for 8,000 square meters of PV panels. And in Indonesia, or at that location, an inclination of 4%, relatively flat, is the most ideal. And if you want to, fuel or power the building plus all this neighboring building, it has to be like that. Plus, technology moved on. Back in the day, yes, we needed the pitched roof to get the water away, but technology is there to have these smaller pitches incorporated without the building being drowning, or you have water damage. Nonetheless, we integrate certain elements of local architecture into the building. And with this gesture, with this sort of inverted roof on the hill, you see it is a very open gesture, a very open form in position to a closed one. So we're working also looking, of course, at the local climate. It is getting hot, but interestingly, if you look at the general sun direction, of course, north-south is easily shadable with overhangs east-west. Needs to be more close. So we structured the whole massing of these buildings long sides north and south, which then also correlates to the major wind direction at the location for having maximum of cross ventilation ability is a word. So we placed the different offices, the palace on top of the hill, outside a sort of geologically not very buildable zone. In relationship, this long side also have the very good view on the botanical gardens in the south. And then with the north-south orientation, we have the way with overhangs to easily shade the facades and reduce solar heat gains. So this is the master plan overview. And what we took also great care of in a way is the accessibility. So the idea of doing it exactly not what we used to do maybe in Indonesia, that everything has to be reachable by car, but really thinking of it more like a campus. So I mean, for instance, Universitas Indonesia has a very nice campus where you have these different buildings. So in a similar way, everything here is connected with the system of Salazar. So this animation is working now. So you have the possibility, if you work there in these offices as a part of the administration, you come by bus, you can enter via this main plaza with a very interesting stretch of stairs and landscaping. But of course, nobody likes to use stairs. So we have this funicular built in, which brings you up to this level or up to the palace level. but then you have the possibility to walk around completely. So you leave your car at home, wherever you live, you use public transportation, and you go there, and then you have the possibility to be shaded and rain protected and walk around and arrive at all these different locations as you need to. Of course, with the vehicular transport, we need access for services, and of course for the vice president arriving at the palace, but also on the other side for the guests to have a bit more. I mean, cannot expect a whatever vice president from another country or walking up the hill or using the funiculare, the little train. So therefore, there is some degree of vehicular and individual transport present. We also like to think about this whole as a not only as a set of buildings, but as a set of buildings with, in its totality, have developed some synergies, right? So we have green roofs on most of the buildings, simply because if you would look outside the building, if you would have photovoltaics, it would be very reflective. So for the microclimate, we have here green roofs for rainwater collection. Who muted me? I'm almost done. You can mute me in a second.
No, sorry. Someone must have muted
No.
by accident.
No problem. So so with all these different sustainability measures, you know, we want to enhance the microclimate, reduce the energy usage, the operational energy, but also increase the livability of this whole campus of vice presidential palace and office building and mosque. So, you know, the sun studies to look at the different sun angles. So you see the overhangs are designed and produced in such a way that it's always shading this facade. The east-west facades are kept smaller, especially the west facade, where you would have then in the afternoon a lot of heat coming in. We have then external sun shadings in the offices as well as the palace, looking at the general wind direction, designing accordingly. All the office buildings with these courtyards in the middle, also being a sort of social space and interaction space. Yeah, here you see then how it looks from the roof. Like I said, we have all the green roofs. Green roofs are fantastic buffer zones. They keep the moist, they keep the water, it evaporates, it cools the building underneath, but it also helps with the water management. Like I said, we don't have solar panels up there because if you would look down and the sun comes from a certain angle, you would be, say, blinded, or the glare would be an issue. But also, if you look outside the palace, you know, part of this building is becoming part of the landscape, and it's not like sort of so obstructive anymore. Then you see here our big sort of axis of stairs where we have the presidential walk. You see later that we always we integrate sort of the memory of the previous presidents of Indonesia, and everything is then connected via this Selasar, where you then can go towards all these different office building, mosques, and the palace itself. So we also studied a little bit how much energy we could produce, and in our original design we have 10,000 square meter roof surface, and if you occupy 8,400 square meter, we can conservatively estimated based on the global atlas produce 2.56 gigawatt hours annual. If we take SDE4 as a comparison, we could even produce more. And if we have, let's say, hybrid cooling, not everything is fully air conditioned, we could potentially run the whole palace independently from any electricity, and even could provide surplus to the office buildings around. And you see here, again, the roof discussion, the roof inclination, the optimal inclination, relatively flat, is 4 degrees for this location. And it works because very often we hear in Indonesia solar panels and so on and so forth. It's not working, it's not efficient. I would argue it's not true. We have other clients in Jakarta who ask us to make even now bigger, flatter roofs because they can rent out the flat roofs to companies who then place all the solar panels on top. And this is an example here, of course, SDE4 in Singapore, and it has proven that it works perfectly fine. And this is a very fascinating building. I think if you ever have the chance to visit Singapore, you should come here. If not, just have a look at the concept, because it is very smartly arranged. Also, all these functions within this or underneath this big roof. It is oriented north and south. It has also the wind direction coming from north and south. We have these sort of semi-outdoor spaces where people can mingle. The wind is blowing through. It's never getting too hot, even if it's 30 or more degrees on the outside. The east and west facades are very closed to shade. The overhang on the south side is also long enough to shade. And then you have this different sort of climatic zones for different usages, where you have full AC in some office spaces, but in the lecture hall or student spaces underneath the roof, you have this hybrid tempered spaces, which uses much less energy than full AC space would do. What happens there is there are fans on the ceiling, and there's chilled air, which then gets distributed by the fans, but only if it's occupied. And since it's not like fully AC, it's just chilled for a couple of degrees and not like to 18 degree. And with that, it uses less energy, but provides the same level of comfort. And if you look at this with this 500, almost 600 megawatt hour electricity production in 2021 measured, only 470 is used, and the rest can be used differently. So I would say, if you build a new palace, if you build a new capital, you have the obligation to be also as energy neutral as possible, and if not CO2 neutral. And therefore, there is no other way around than implementing photovoltaics and this form of design for this location. Because in the end of the day, operating energy, so for usage, is a relatively small part, but embodied energy, gray energy, which is coming from extracting the materials, transporting, manufacturing, is the bigger part. And this is sometimes something you do not have under control as an architect. Therefore, again, this sort of reforestation, because mangroves, for instance, water plants, but forests, they're absorbing their CO2 sinks. So we have a very big piece of land, and by reforesting it and making it really dense and lush and green, we have the possibility to offset all these carbon emissions through the construction process over the years with the forest. So the palace is built around the idea around several courtyards, because then you have also the possibility for cross ventilation, the chilled ceiling, fans, distributing the air, the overhangs, and even external shading possibility if need be. Then if you arrive in the palace from towards the palace from the west side, so if you work there, you have these big steps, which you're being brought up by a vernacular if you don't want to walk. Of course, in a way, it also fulfills a certain healthy agenda. So if you would walk the stairs every day a couple of times, it would be good for your physical health as well. But it becomes also a great sort of iconic spot underneath the roof. This is also one of the parts why we inverted this roof, because you're standing on the bottom of the hill, and if you look up, then you see this sort of more or less inverted pitched roof, and it becomes sort of a fifth facade in that sense, which you can observe and perceive. So if you come then up to the upper plaza, you have then the presidential walk, where in these water features we have this idea to integrate all these memories of the previous presidents, and you can walk around so as a pedestrian and reach all the cellars are. Here underneath the palace at this point is the big function meeting room, press conference room, always related to the surrounding. You can have this great panoramic view. And so in that sense, in that sense, it is also, this transparency is also allowing people working there, and as well tourists, to participate, not of course necessarily sitting there, but participate in viewing how democratic processes are executed and lived. And the big reflection pond at the palace, and this covered semi-outdoor spaces. Yeah, and finally, for the offices itself, the facade design. So on all the east-west facades, you have extendable louvers, which can be put down in order to minimize the heat gain. Like I said, green roof is good for water management, but also for cooling the building underneath. There are studies, if you have a barren concrete roof, it heats up to 50 degrees Celsius. But if you have a green roof with evaporation, it's only 27 degrees, even though it is 30 degrees on the outside. Overhangs on north and south sides to also block this sort of light. Again, yeah, hybrid system, and in a way, a social space in these courtyards for interaction, where then people can meet and mingle and talk with each other. Sort of instead of having locked off office spaces, also give the people the possibility to mingle and interact within the building in comfortable spaces, and sort of live democracy. And finally, and last, of course, but not least, the mosque with a similar design principle, where then screens and start filtering the light, and not only contribute to the climatic performance, but then also to the ambience of the building, and taking care of special requirements a spiritual, religious building has to fulfill. And yeah, with this, I am done with my presentation and lecture. Yeah, and I hope you enjoyed it very much. And now I'm a little bit over time, but I think it's still okay.
It's not a problem. We really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Florian, for that really inspiring presentation. I think it's to say my students learned so much, and everyone here, not just my students, I think all the audience must have really learned a lot from you. We have some time for question and answer now. I will take 3 questions. To those of you who are in Zoom, if you have questions, you can also type them in the chat box, and I will read them to the forum later. But for those of you who are in the audience now, in the auditorium, I will take some questions. If you want to ask in English, that's fine as well. Okay. Okay, I have one question. Wait, okay. I have 2 questions here in the audience. Would you like to answer them one by one, or just wait until both questions are asked?
No, let's do it one by one, because otherwise
Okay, right. Let's do them one by one. Bu Ratna, Cozy.
Okay. Oh. Hello, Professor Florian. I am Ratna.
Hello, Bu Ratna.
Yeah, I'm from Architecture Department, UPJ. Very interesting that the concept you saw us about the micro library. I wonder what was the criteria of the site you choose for those library. It's the first question. Is it always a neglected site at the urban area or not? And the second question also about the micro library. The micro library use the tropical architecture, right? So much openings to maximize the natural ventilation. And I wonder, is it still works when the library placed at the urban area in Indonesia, which we know that the urban area in Indonesia very high pollution, So is it still feel comfortable for the users doing those activities with the concept of natural ventilation? Okay, that's all the question for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Ratna, for your question. So the criteria for the site is, of course, often, I don't know, chosen for us in a way, because, you know, with hanging gardens, Bima, in Bandung, we were working together with Ridwan Kamil. And sometimes he has a site, or sometimes we look at several sites. So for instance, for the hanging garden, it was sponsored by a company, Manila Water, and they wanted to have it in their vicinity next to their office building. And we specifically asked them for another site because it was a more middle-class neighborhood and not very lively. And if you would have built a library there, it would not have served the people. So we asked then the city, do they have other sites? And then they gave us this site for Kiara Jondo. And we looked at it and we saw, okay, this is an interesting site because there's a school next to it. There's a military compound. There is administration and Puskesmas, and also it's a very lively site and could be maximized for exposure and catchment, say, for the people, because it's already a sort of a center, the location, right? So the same goes with Varakayu and Bima to an extent. So we always, you know, try to talk with the city, because the city is giving the site and giving the location. They have to agree, but we always try to get a site which is sort of really has maximum exposure to people and liveliness in a way that it, you know, that it benefits all rather than being sort of hidden away. Now with tropical architecture, whether it still works in an urban area, yeah, I think you can do it in two ways, right? You could make a completely closed building or a much more closed building and try to filter the air in order to solve the issue of the pollution and the dust. But the question is this the right step? Because then every building needs to be sort of filtered. I know from a friend, he has a acquaintance, he's from Switzerland. He built himself a house in Jakarta and made it completely airtight, and everything is completely filtered out, all the particles and the fine dust and stuff like this. But I don't think it's the way forward. I think the way forward is we have to change our mode of transportation, and we have to change our behavior, and we have to change as a whole how the streets are used, and we have to switch towards something more clean, not combustion based, right? And with that, then you can solve pollution issue. And this pollution issue, of course, is, I mean, is a problem in Indonesia on a larger scale, which goes from ranges from not only angkot and a lot of knalpot at the scooter and things like this, but also plastic waste, waste management, garbage still being burned in the neighborhood instead of disposed. Little strategies of what to do with all these plastics. If you go at all this Warung, everybody's, you know, gives you a small sachet of things. You know, plastic bags are, for instance, banned in Bali, but this doesn't go far enough. You know, also Indonesia partly, according to a New York Times article, is importing plastic waste and then use plastic from other countries as a fuel for tempeh and tofu production, right? And these people, they're living in kampungs where the soot is falling from the sky and everything is black. Now, coming back to that, so I think we as a society as a whole need to tackle these challenges, these urban challenges in terms of transportation, clean transportation, and pollution. So in that sense, if you make a micro library airtight, you know, in order to have no noise pollution, no pollution from exhaust, Sure, it works, but it would make the microlibrary more expensive. And I think, it would be like if you have a chronic headache, right? So maybe you should go to the doctor and look at the root of the problem rather than taking every day an aspirin. So, using this sort of technology to make every building airtight and protect from pollution is not going to the root of the source of the problem. Yes, if you go Varakayu, there's a big street next to it. If you go Bima, as soon as a scooter passes by with an open knallpot, it is damn loud. But quite honestly, quite frankly, when I was living in Bandung in my normal house, which we rented, even though it is made from brick and concrete with single glazing, it was still as loud. And if somebody burned the plastic, I still could smell the burned plastic inside the house. So, even if we have a closed house in an Indonesian context, I think this closeness and this idea how much we are detached with that from the environment is a little bit of an illusion. Even if you have a closed house, you still get everything inside because of the glazing and a little bit of cross ventilation. Then if you really want to do this properly, you need to have really a complete airtight house. And I think everybody, no matter what library or not, if you live in a certain neighborhood, you have this problem with the noise and the pollution already, and that needs to be solved rather than only the building itself. I think we need to do it on a larger level. I hope this answers the question.
Thank you, Professor Florian. We have another question from Pak Surya. Yeah.
Thank you, Prof. Florian. Yes. I want to asking about maintaining costs about the building that you have designed, especially the one that already in operational time. And then for the Vice President office, is maintaining costs become one of the consideration? That's all my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Pasuria, for your question. Okay, I would like to ask you how do you determining this maintaining cost, or I have a little bit of difficulty to answer this question. I mean, if you have a regular building, let's say, which is made from brick and concrete, you also have certain maintenance costs. But the question is, are you investing this money? Are you doing it? Meaning, are you cleaning your windows? Are you repainting this building every 5 years? I see a lot of roof overhangs in Indonesia made in concrete, and because the flat roof layering is not made properly, you have all this water damage. So you have all the water stains there. Mushroom is growing and stuff like this. So how does this non-maintenance or this maintenance, some people do and some do, how does this relate? In what way would it relate to our building? Because, for instance, Varakayu, so we use for the facade outdoor quality plywood, which is coated. And of course, you have to recoat it every here and then, as well as you have to paint the building every here and then if you want to maintain it. And I would say the costs are not different. Now, if you take the Vice Presidential Palace, yeah, you have to clean the glass, but as much as you have to clean a glass window in a high-rise in a skyscraper. So I don't see why our designs differ in any way from other designs.
Surya, do you want to have comments on that, or? Okay, that's apparently enough. We have a couple more questions from Zoom here, Professor Florian. I will read them so that the audience here can tell. Hello, Professor Florian. My name is Zulfikar. This is one of our students. I have a question. I noticed that every urban design is not far away from the problem of climate change. So the question is that if we design in response to climate change, can we actually solve climate change, or can we only improve from the current situation?
Oh, that's a very tricky question. I mean, I really do hope that we can solve climate change, because, if we continue what we're doing and the temperature is rising, then we will be at a point of no return. And unfortunately, we are too slow at the moment with what we're doing. And I mean, I have this very interesting book here. It's called Flourish. Flourish by Sarah Ichioka. And what is very nice about it, it describes sort of the idea of the narrative. And a lot of practitioners have this stuck in their head. We cannot do anything about the situation because the reality is as such. The regulation does not support it. The project developer does not want it, right? We cannot do anything about it. The building industry doesn't give us better sustainable materials. So I just want to urge everybody to just, try to do their best step by step, instead of like everybody giving up and saying like, yeah, we can't do anything. Everybody starts to think, how can I contribute in my own way, and does the utmost best for saving our planet and our livelihood. So and therefore, if I think like projects like Potter, the new capital, if this project is going through and is happening, I think it is our obligation as urban designers and architects to make it as sustainable as possible, to show that it is possible, right? And not to just do it like business like usual, right? And that is not only in terms of construction and not only in terms of design, but also in terms of how these projects are happening, right? I mean, this is a new city representing Indonesia, the fifth biggest populated country, the biggest Muslim country, a democracy. Then these decision-making processes, how these projects are chosen, have to be transparent and democratic as well. They cannot go in the old ways. So this is, I think, utmost important, that it represents the people and that it represents clean and clean energy, and it shows that we all try to do our best and contribute with all we can. Of course, within the reality, but trying to push every time a little bit further, nut by nut, not looking at the whole mountain of nuts, but like a squirrel does it, nut by nut, tiny little steps till we arrive where we need to be. So I hope that answers a little bit the question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Professor Florian. We have another one here from Zoom, and then another one, two more on the audience. Wow. I hope you still have time for this.
I'm good.
Thank you. So, hello, I'm Rukaya, a self-taught architect from Sri Lanka. I have a question regarding the building with the beads. How does the design prevent rainwater from entering through the spaces between the beads?
Hello, Rukaya. Thank you for your question. Good. the beads house, in a way, is a very conceptual design, right? And it was never built. But there are two ways of doing so. One is the roof overhang. So you need to get as much as possible roof overhang. There are some formulas where you can calculate that, but according to our experience, even if we calculate it to this formula, it does not help with the tropical rain. So if there's enough wind, the water gets blown inside. Therefore, you need a sort of maybe secondary layer which you can close. So in the Warakayu, we have the curtain. In Bima, we have the how to say the polycarbonate screen. So you need to work maybe with liminal zones. So the sort of also maybe the structuring, you need to think about, what is more sensitive towards water, what needs to be more dry, and then you structure it more like an onion going inside, that you have the most water protected you put on the inside, right? So I think it's quite interesting to think about what sort of functions and programs of the building can be closer to the perimeter, need more airflow, need more shade, need more rain protection, and you start arranging these programs accordingly. And yeah, maybe the beads itself are not the only answer, but it's sort of more of a conceptual thinking, right? But practically speaking, yeah, you would need to integrate some maybe sliding doors if it gets too harsh in terms of rain, that you need to block it temporarily. But the sort of the normal mode of operation is the beads, and the more extreme tropical rain is then, yeah, in some parts more closed, more watertight.
Thank you. Questions from the audience?
Good morning, Professor Florian. My name is Nabiila. So my questions would be, if we're talking about urban acupunctures, it needs to be easily understood by a lot of people in the first place. And I also have, in my opinion, a good design is a design that does not require any kinds of manual, so people would understand it easily. So my question is, if we would create an urban acupuncture interventions, something that is new and never been made, how to create a design that would explain by itself about its purpose so that it could build the citizen consciousness about interventions it brings. Because sometimes if we go back to simple questions, then sometimes we were faced by the same kind of finishings and solutions. I think that would be my questions. Thank you.
Hi, Nabil. Thank you very much for your question. Yeah, this is it's very interesting. I mean, I think it already starts with urban acupuncture. I mean, if you take it literally, though, if you have acupuncture and it deals with the human body with different sicknesses or reliefs or streams and flows of energy, you need some form of experience and knowledge in order to practice that on human beings. So I guess in our profession, one needs also some experience and knowledge in order to do so. Knowledge you learn, of course, at university. Experience you can only gain from outside and learning. But that also includes that you make some mistakes, and as long as you can rectify them, that should be fine. So the design without manual and easy to be understood. I think it works both ways. So because what happens in some of our designs, we propose something for a certain usage, and then it's used completely different, and we are very surprised. And this is this fascinating learning process where you then can say, okay, we flip this around, we make it work the next time differently. We start employing this as a design technique. So for instance, using the artificial lawn and the Taman film, that people start to change the behavior, taking off their shoes because it's more like a carpet than grass. So they did it without a menu, right? They sort of saw it and it triggered them. And this is a quite fascinating moment, because then, you know, okay, you realize people do that. The next project, we'll do it again where we want to have it, or where we want to have the same behavior of it. Other things were like when we designed Alun-Alun Cicendo in Bandung, we made this sort of dry garden where we thought like people will sit there more for the elderly, sort of more meditative. So what happens with these little cobblestones, people were taking off their shoes and were walking around, and it became more of like a reflexology garden, right? So, you know, they didn't use it for sitting, but I think not everything needs to be explained, you know, in a way, or if it's not working according to intention, you know, let the people do, right? Not everything has to be intentional, and as long as it's not hurting anybody, or it is, you know, used in a positive way, then I think it's fine, and we should let it happen as architects. So maybe this is also the question for architects or urban designers in general. Can we also let go at a certain moment and let our places we create being used differently and not according to our intention? I hope that somewhat answers your question.
Do you have comments, Nabil? Or no? That's enough? Okay, you have comments.
No,
Okay.
it's actually a really fascinating answers from you. So in the end, it's all about the people, let them do what they're doing. And sometimes we need to actually push back our egocentrics, right? So
yes,
we need to be more humans towards the environments itself and the humans itself.
Yes, and the best thing is if you can observe, you know, and you can learn from it, then the next time you can, then you know how they behave, or you can predict how they behave, then you use this for your design, right? But that requires a little bit of experience. So what I find quite fascinating is if I visit architecture and I take a picture, a photo, when I catch myself that I want to take a photo without people because the purity of the space, then it's for sure a problem, because then it's not a place. It's not a place for human interaction, but then it becomes more of a sculpture. And then I think that's where architecture starts failing, right? But if you take a picture where human interaction complement the architecture, and it's not about this purity of the space, then I think then it's going into the right direction.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nabil, and thank you, Professor Florian. We have another one? Oh, no, that's all? Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Florian, for your answers to all of these questions. I'm sure we were learning so much. And that actually concludes your session for today, but we do hope you would stay until the end of the seminar and stay here for Ibu Nadya's presentation, and maybe you can have a discussion later on. So everyone, please give your most raucous applause to Professor Florian.
Thank you. Terima kasih. Hatur nuhun.
Yes, thank you very much. Now we will start. I hope everyone still has energy left. Do you need to take a drink break? What do you need to do? Because if not, we will start with our second keynote speech from Ibu Nadya. Are you ready? Are you nervous? You can have this clip-on microphone. Can someone help her put it on? Maybe. Okay. So before we start the presentation, as always, I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction. Who is this lovely, brilliant woman next to me who's about to present? So Ibu Nadya is a multifaceted architect specializing in urban design and spatial planning policy development. She graduated in 2011 and received an undergraduate double degree from Universitas Diponegoro. This is how we met, from Universitas Diponegoro, and also from Sakshan University of Applied Sciences, majoring in architecture and urban design built environment. She later was granted LPDP scholarship to continue her master's degree in ITB. School of Architecture, Planning and Policy Developments, specializing also in urban design, and graduated in 2017. She previously worked in PSUD, Center of Urban Design Studies in Bandung for 5 years, and she had the opportunities undertaking strategic development projects throughout cities in Indonesia, including projects such as MRT Jakarta. So my students who are in urban design, you're redesigning Block M and ASEAN. It was all her work. No. So not all her work. She contributed to this project. And also in the new Indonesian new capital city. In 2022, so just this year, she co-founded an AA architecture studio in collaboration, which is also based in Bandung, with her husband, architect Aris Adi Nugraha, interlacing urban design within the architecture core expertise. She is a certified architect and an active member of both the Indonesian Institute of Urban Designer and the West Java chapter of Indonesian Institute of Architects. So we have two very seasoned experts here with us today, and I hope all of you can really take this opportunity to ask a lot of questions. Maybe you have questions about in your urban design course, like whatever it is you're wondering about, your worries about urban designs, you have the opportunity to ask really probing questions. So remember that we have Gozi here who will help you translate your questions. So don't worry too much about the language barrier. Now, please give your warmest welcome to Ibu Nadya Victoryka.
Please allow myself to share the screen.
Sure. Boleh ini bisa share screen nggak? Oh, bisa. You can stand, you can move around.
I'll just sit here.
Okay.
Hey. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Check. Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. No? Yeah. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really humbled to be here. I'm very honored, Ibu Ratna is the head of the department of architecture department in UPJ, and also Ibu Rahma is the vice head of department of UPJ, and also Ibu Isa. Today, I will deliver a recent experience as an urban designer. So I hope that the materials I will deliver is relatable to what people are experiencing within the urban realm and urban design process. And I hope that what I share can add value to whatever work students in UPJ will bring in the future. Okay, let's just start. Before I explain more about urban design process, I think we all know that the most basic issue of why urban design is needed is because of the population growth in countries and also cities. This is not excluding cities in Indonesia. So we all know that 57% of the population are now living in urban areas in Indonesia, and that causes a lot of problems, which becomes what we urban designers have to facilitate in order to create a better environment. So as we know that if we have a lot of more people, a lot of population within a city, we have more interest that we have to cater within the city. And this is causing a higher probability of conflicts. Like, for instance, if we have more population, like, for instance, in Jakarta, we have a lot more people living in Jakarta. There are issues in regards to density and also diverse cultural background, diverse needs of the citizens, which has diverse economic level, educational level, and other socio-economic factors that causes an issue for city managers and also the public sector, in this case, the government, to create a livable city. So it's really problematic when you have a certain area of highly populated with high population and also a lot of problems that occur in one place. So that's why urban designers are very well needed in order to help the city managers and also the government to solve or to facilitate issues in creating a better environment. So we all know that there are a lot of urban issues and challenges that the government and also us as the citizens, as the users face on daily basis. So basically population density is the core issue of whatever challenges that we face in the urban realm. Like we have a lot of population growth, the population is growing, but there are limited availability of land and, you know, the increasing land price, which then again adds by the growth of urbanization and increasing need of job opportunities. So all these problems are the things that urban designers and also the government have to face in order to create a good environment for people to live. So that's only in the physical aspect. So there are other aspects like such as socio-cultural conflicts, economic gap, lack of understanding of public law, and also lack of sensibility in basic human rights. It's also things that adds, you know, the problems within our urban realm, which is possible to make our cities less safe, less friendly, and so on. So that's why it is really important to underline that these issues are the things that we designers face and we need to address in order to create a sound design. So as a conclusion, cities needs to be functional, but not only that, beyond that, it also needs to be beautiful and sustainable. And this is also underlined by John Lang as a urban design academic and also a practitioner, that the form of urban design products is very related to the social and political context which they take place. And this is not excluding in cities in Indonesia. So I would like to take friends in this room and also students and practitioners to see that Indonesia needs facilitators, urban designers to help, you know, become the bridge of multi-interest from other stakeholders. This is including the government, the public community, and development cooperation. So urban designers, different maybe than architects, we deal with a more complex issues that involves multi-stakeholders that sometimes we cannot work by ourselves. We need to work together with other multidisciplinary backgrounds, such as transportation experts, city planners, even architects, and also landscape architects, environmentalists, civil engineers, and other social anthropology expertise that will help us to identify and even to bring solution, not only in the form of design, but also in the form of strategies, action plans that can be brought within the design further than the form itself. So it is important that we need to understand the position of urban design as a facilitator, not as a person or an expert who forces a certain design for people to like or to benefit from, but we need to facilitate the needs and also the interest of the public, especially, and also the people who lives in the cities for the greater good. So I always remember what my professor from PSUD, he's also one of the founder of urban design in Indonesia, Professor Daniswara. He is he brought urban design to Indonesia and advocated how urban designers are a game changer to how cities can become a better place to live. So it's beyond building. It's there's a lot of dimension within the urban scope that we can design. So it's really important to see beyond the building itself. So yeah. That I mentioned that there are a lot of interests in Indonesia. Yeah, so we know that the public space is a very complex realm that is described as a space with a lot of ownership. So we can see that in this picture, this is a very informative picture from PSUD, which depicts how public space are owned or are managed by a lot of interests. Like, for instance, this is there are a lot of stakeholders in one particular public realm. As we can see, this is a road. So we can see that this is one of the most difficult thing in urban design is to define who is responsible of which space, which then this is where urban designers act as a facilitator for that particular stakeholder. So that is why it is important to define public and private area within the city. So we know that where we can we can create intervention between these two areas. Sometimes it's very hard for us to intervene private areas because it is owned by the private sector, but it is possible to create such guidelines that can contribute to the city so that developments within the public parcels can contribute back to the public for the public communities. And that is one of the challenges we face as urban designers. Like, for instance, PSUD's effort since 1998 is to create a very friendly building frontage with along the Tamrin area, and it is one of the most challenging thing to conduct for opening gates and eliminating fences, because one of the as we know that one of the principles in creating safer roads, safer space is to have that certain surveillance and also the closenesses to the building frontage towards the pedestrian area. And to create that, the PSUD had to negotiate with every parcel of land along the main road and talk to the stakeholders that it is important to create such to have that kind of environment in order to create the city a better city in the future. And I think that's one of the most successful movement that PSUD has done, and it has continued now, especially with the development of MRT, which makes the city center becoming more vibrant, lively, and more pedestrian friendly. So before I continue to the process of urban designing, we must know that there are a lot of types of works that urban designers can produce or can provide as an output. So this is actually what we as urban designers can offer for as a consultant to private or public sector. So there are four major types of urban design work. First is the total urban design, where the designers are also the people who are involved involved within the development from the inception to the completion of the project. And this is one of the example is done in Brasilia. And this is one of the new capital city they have in Brasilia as a strategy to create a better city than the previous city they have. And the next is all of a piece urban design. So one of the example I took here is the Ibu Kota Nusantara, which was promoted and also designed by Urban Plus from the competition. So Urban Plus had created a master plan for the KIPP, which is the inner core of the Ikayan area. And from that competition, they provided an urban design development guidelines, which then was developed further by other consultants in a form of in a scale of precincts to control each precinct, and that has become one of the development tools for the Ministry of Public Works to develop the area. And the first stage it will be built in 2024. So I think the project now has been conducted, and I think some of the project has also been delivered, including what Professor Florian and also the Shao team has done. So the Ministry of Public Work has conducted several procurements and also projects, activities for detailed developments for the first phase of and they are catching up very fast. And this is also a challenge for consultants to be able to deliver a sound urban design guidelines for the developers and also investors to develop further in the future. And the third one is a piece by piece urban design, which one of the example you can see is the SCBD, which I think not many people know that the first urban design guideline made in Indonesia was for this place, which was done by Professor Muhammad Daniswaro from Pusat Studi Urban Design, or the Center of Urban Design Studies. This was a manifestation of the development of the detailed spatial planning of Jakarta, where this particular area has been appointed as the strategic finance area, which then developed by a private sector within a, if I'm not mistaken, 100 hectares of land. And this was made as a urban design guideline and became a statutory policy document in a form of governor decree, which then has to be complied with any developers that have the initiative to build within the area. So they have to comply with the vision and the concept of the area within the urban design guideline. And the third one is the plug-in urban design, or we can usually say it's an intervention. This is more of a smaller scale typology that most people see. One of the examples I can probably say is the MRT TOD Jakarta, which also was developed by PSUD since 2007. So this type of plug-in urban design is a way of implementing infrastructure and also developing an area with the aid of infrastructure, and this infrastructure to be plugged in within and enhance the location. So we can see that over the last decade since the MRT Jakarta was built, I think there's a lot of development happening. I think that is also a part of urban acupuncture in a larger scale that has happened in Jakarta. We can see that with the additional infrastructure that has helped Jakarta to solve the congestion issues and also the movement issues of our urban population, then results in more, vibrant city where people where investors see that these infrastructure helps developers to increase ridership. When there's an increase of ridership, it means that there are increase of capital. When there's an increase of capital, it means that there will be more investment going on. And this is the motivation of developments now happening along the MRT corridor. So we can probably realize that there are new developments and also improvements that are happening on public spaces in Jakarta. And I think this is one of the greatest contribution towards that phenomena. So we can see that there's a lot of pedestrian lanes that have been revitalized, parks that has been also revitalized, and a lot of buildings that has become more beneficial in terms of location because they are close to the transit area. And I think every private sector are capturing the moment. And I think this is also an important thing for us to learn strategy. And as I mentioned before, the scale of urban design intervention can vary. So we can have intervention in a city scale, which I mentioned earlier about how infrastructure can promote development, and city level. And there's also in the district level where, for instance, this is a park which is recently revitalized in Kebayoran area, Taman Puring. This was also a project I have conducted with PSUD in 2017. And there's also intervention in the neighborhood level. I think one of the examples we can see previously is from the works of Shao as seen by the micro library, or interventions in a very small scale, which contributes also largely to a certain area. So intervention can come in different scales, which they can impact they can bring a big impact. So I think it's important to note is that every scale of intervention matters because it brings solution to the issues that are faced in the urban realm. So in this context, I would like to explain why urban design in Indonesia is special. Is because we have a planning system that is the foundation of what urban designers do. So in the Indonesian context of spatial planning, every product of urban design has to comply to the development plan and also the general spatial planning to the detailed spatial planning, which then this hierarchy sets a very strong foundation of what urban designers do and how this product, the product of urban design, is then being able to be implemented in a practical level. So sometimes it is very hard to have certain initiatives that are not supported by the government, but there are a lot of products, the government products, for instance, community action plans that have been done in Jakarta for improving kampung areas and also areas that are facing degradation. And also, I think the most notable products, as we know, as what urban designers, especially me, have been conducting is the urban design guidelines. So there are various products of building and environmental organization or improvements that can be done as an urban designer to help to make cities more livable and also more vibrant. So the urban designers operates within the red square. So we can provide building environmental organization in certain types according to the complexity and also the level of physical change that might occur. So based on the level of physical change, we can see that there are 3 categories. So the first category is the conservation. So this is one of the strategies of regenerations that are minimum in physical change. And the second is the rehabilitation or improvement. This is a strategy that involves a medium level of physical change. So this also includes the revitalizations of pedestrian areas, revitalization of parks, and also revitalizations of kampung. And the third, or the last one, we have the large level of physical change or intervention. This is called redevelopment. I think one of the examples that has been done in Jakarta is surprisingly a CBD. So it was once a very low density kampung, which was then turned into a very high density strategic area that is now one of the most expensive and also the most very strategic and also highly valued in terms of their activity. So it has become the center of finance and also economy in Jakarta. And I think in spite of the debates on the process of development, it is one of the categories that sets an example of how regeneration in a larger scale can happen in Indonesia. And that can be done with the tool, which is the urban design guideline. A general process of urban designing in Indonesia is, this is the 4 major steps that usually is done. I think this is a very basic method of designing. First, we prepare and collect data to collect issues and conduct benchmarking. So to understand what designers are facing. And the second is to go deep into analyzing this data to understand what kind of issues that are identification of problems, so that we can determine what kind of approach we can use to be delivered within our output of urban design. So the analysis can usually in Indonesia consists of physical condition analysis and also non-physical condition analysis. And I think in physical condition analysis is something that is already in general being applied by architects as in site analysis. But I think what I would like to deliver is that non-physical condition is also a very important aspect in urban design to analyze, because this is a dimension beyond the physical aspects that we have to deliver within the products, such as socio-economy, politics, land tenure and ownership, and so on. So these 2 aspects of analysis is very important for urban designers, so that they can create a sound urban design or design for the area, and also to create, to bring benefit to the citizens or the users of the area. And the third phase is the conceptual design or the visioning. So after we have identified the kind of issues or problems we are facing and the approach we use to tackle the issue, we then conceptualize what kind of environment we want to create to settle the issue. And usually to conceptualize the design, we must see these basic components, or as we say, the urban design components. I think this is also a very basic components that that we must understand. It exists within our urban realm. So there's land use, building intensity, circulation, movement and parking, green open space, building massing, signage and street furniture, as well as infrastructure and utility. So this might seem like very simple components, but if we look deeper to the utilization and also the function of these components, it is actually a system where it can help the city to function properly or to function well. So we cannot miss one of these components when we are designing the city. So it is very basic, but it's really important for urban designers to realize that these are the things that we must address in the concept to tackle the issues that has been identified. And the last one is the finalization. And as mentioned before, in finalizing the design, this can come form in various products, such as master plan, urban design guidelines, 3D simulations and design areas, or it can be conducted in a form of small intervention in a smaller city scale. So it depends on the level of problem, and also the kind of, the kind of solution we want to bring. So that's why it's really important for the first and second process of the urban designing, so that we can have a very, on point strategy to offer to the environment. So as mentioned before, this urban design component is what I always seek when delivering concepts. So it might seem as a very boring picture, but this speaks 1,000 words. So this is a very basic components that are usually being delivered in spatial planning documents in Jakarta, such as the guidelines that has been delivered for Kota Tua or SEBD or other places that has the certain guidelines to reach their vision. So usually in the scope of urban design guideline, urban designers must configure or must figure out what kind of vision to be implemented for a certain area, so they can be a more functional, more beautiful, and more aesthetic at the same time. So there are land use, micro land use. So maybe for land use, I think this is already familiar for people. So we have, composition of housing areas, compositions of commercial areas, mixed-use areas. And I think the most important thing to address in the land use is that we must understand that a city works in a system. So when we see that a system has certain proportions of built and unbuilt land, this must be kept so that balance can be implemented within a space. Sometimes I think this is very hard to say, that architects sometimes don't really realize that they have to comply to a very greater regulation, a broader regulation, because this actually impacts a larger scale of area. So trust me that regulations that has been established in the higher level it has been analyzed very meticulously to support this kind of balance for a greater area. And I think this is also important to note for architects to comply these kind of regulations when building a certain or particular parcel. And the second is the micro land use. Micro land use is actually the development of land use in a very detailed scale. So when we have one particular land use, let's say mixed use, we have a more detailed micro land use. We can use a lower level of in a lower level, like the podium for commercial and also public activities, and the tower for residential areas. And these proportion are being controlled within the spatial planning documents. And what we do as urban designers is to determine these composition in order to create that kind of balance, and also to deliver the kind of issues, and also to deliver a very balanced environment. Next, we have the building massing. This relates closely to the certain typologies that will be brought within the urban space. For instance, we have in Jakarta, we have landmarks such as Monas, and these landmarks are the elements of the city that brings the identity of the character of the area. So building massing provides the area character, and also a sense of skyline, and also this visual proportion, visual balance that is that brings benefit to the type of experience people face when living in that certain or particular city. And the next one is green open space. This includes landscape, hardscape plazas, and also private open space, active space, and also nowadays it's developed into other spaces such as green roofs and green walls. So this component particularly is one of the most important component in creating a sound environment for the city. So sometimes we almost forgot that green open spaces or open spaces are very vital to to create a very livable neighborhood. It's not just a matter of providing a green space, but it's a matter of being able to put or to provide spaces for people to interact and to experience recreation, and also to just spend or relieve your stress when after you go to the office. So this is really important, but very hard to acquire sometimes because of the limited land, and when development favors built environment compared to unbuilt environment. So this is the things that sometimes urban designers advocate to provide these kind of spaces. And the next is the pedestrian circulation and also vehicular circulation and access. This is also a system that needs to be addressed, because this is the main system that helps people move. And when people are aided with these modes of transportation, these facilities, pedestrian facilities, it helps the economy running. Like for I think one of the example in Jakarta is when it happens floods, and suddenly the transportation, suddenly all the vehicular access is being blocked, and then it just somehow it contributes to the economy in a very negative way. So this is also important for urban designers to address. And the last one is building intensity. Sometimes building intensity is a thing that is very hard to comprehend, especially when this relates to volume and also percentages of, let's say, floor area ratio, and also building coverage. Floor area ratio very relates closely to the population density. When we have a higher ratio, it means that it can accommodate, it can cater more population density. And that's why in Jakarta, especially, intensity of building is higher than most areas in other cities because of that certain population. And to be able to determine these kind of building intensity, you will need other inputs from other expertise, such as transportation, because the implication of having high building intensity is that we need to provide how this population can be transferred from one place to another, so that it's efficient and also it's effective in a way. So that's why these component cannot be separated from one to another, because it's a integrated system that needs to be well intertwined to create a very well-running city. So this is very basic, but this is the most important components to be addressed when delivering concepts in urban design. And it can be developed in a more detailed output. Again, based on the issues that are being addressed or that are needed to be addressed. And we have the last is utility and infrastructure. Sometimes it's always it gets forgotten because we can't really see infrastructure and utility, but this is also a system that it needs to be integrated within these urban components so that we have all these city running in a very good manner. So as an example, this is one of the products that urban designers usually deliver in providing the kind of access for a city. Sometimes it's in a map, you only see one line, but when we go more detailed, this one line can provide various modes of transport that can help various type of movement. For instance, we have the pedestrians, we have the bicycles, we have the public transport vehicles, and so on. So even nowadays, underground area is also being utilized to cater these kind of movements. So there are a lot of there are a lot of things that we need to understand within the public realm of how the city works. So it's I think I suggest when you go like strolling in the city, you observe on what kind of things that are happening in our public realm and what kind of, sometimes that's what I do. When we go to other cities, we learn about these components and how city managers manage these kind of components so that we can learn from the positive sides to be implemented to the issues we try to tackle within our city. So that's one of the examples. And the aspects of analysis of urban design is also various, not only in terms of environment, but we also have other dimensions such as socio-demography and economy. We have, again, the environment, public facility and infrastructure, land tenure and ownership, and also transportation. So this is very basic. Again, this is very basic, but this is very complex in terms of how we determine the right formula to create a well-working or well-functioning city. And I think this is a basic requirements that needs to be done by urban designers based on the Ministry of Public Works law. So this is something that needs to be addressed in general as an urban designer when delivering certain urban design products. And as the topic for today is urban acupuncture, I would like to highlight the first aspect, which is socio-demography and economy. So I think this is one of the most, not talk about aspects within the architecture expertise. I mean, there are a lot of designers that are very good technically, but I think unlike maybe this is one of the examples as what have Shaw done, I think not a lot of architects are interested in this kind of aspect because there are a high complexity in dealing with this aspect, because we see that there are, especially Indonesia, where we have various backgrounds, socio backgrounds and culture and also religion, which is really sometimes very hard to address. But again, this is one of the issue that creates character if being well treated or being well delivered or dressed within the design. And I think one of the approaches that we as designers usually do or usually implement is inclusive design. This is very basic approach in designing. Inclusive design is what we perceive in this as an urban designers is to deliver or address the needs of those vulnerable. So we must facilitate the needs of people who are the most vulnerable. So for instance, we have vulnerable groups such as people's using wheelchairs, children's, women's, and also elderly. And this might not seem visible, but this is the people, the group that we need to advocate as urban designers, because these people have the rights to experience public space, as well as the people who do not have certain barriers in using public space. So I hope that more designers are aware of the vulnerable groups that needs to be addressed in every design. I think from the smaller scale of approach is the universal designs that usually are used in buildings. And I think this is really great if we can implement to be addressed in a larger scale, which is the urban scale. So this is not easy, but I think this is very important for all of us to create a better and also safe environment for all people. And still related to inclusive design is how we can utilize public participation to address the issue. So as urban designers or even architects, sometimes it's not easy to determine the kind of issues that users actually face. Sometimes, we try to guess, we try to study, but I think the most general approach that social experts do is to include the participation of users in the process of designing. And I think this is also a challenge, because sometimes we understand that including participation or users' participation requires more time and sometimes energy and so on. But I think this is the most effective tool to understand the user's need. And this can be done in various ways. But I think one of the things I would like to stress in this diagram is that sometimes what makes it not easy is the level of participation within the participants or within the user. Sometimes, especially in the socioculture of Indonesia, where we are not used to, being vocal or not used to delivering ideas to public, this becomes very hard. And as designers, we face this on daily basis. That's why it requires a strategy to include this participation. And there are a lot of tools nowadays we can use and creatively include within the design process, such as we can use workshops, FGDs. We can even use online pollings. And I think there's a lot of tools that we can use to gather or to conduct public participation. And I think this is really important for us to conduct. And this is also a basic requirements that needs to be done based on the Indonesian ministerial law of public works. So it is stated that the community-based development empowers community to actively participate and contribute in determining building and environmental organization or improvement. So this, in the process, it can be done in phases. For instance, in the identification phase, where we try to identify issue, we gather the user's thoughts and issues faced by users in understanding what may be the main problem. Sometimes, architects see the main problem from their perspective, and it's not always right. I mean, it can be right when you have, as what Professor Florian say, if we have the experience or we have the capacity to understand by the, by the frequently experience or projects that we've done, but usually in this to strengthen our findings, we identify by including the users. And the next is we can use public participant in the analysis phase, where we gather users' thoughts on our aspiration as key understanding to what may be the solution, including the user's role within the process. So we can determine how the stakeholders, the community that are being involved can participate in providing the solution. I think that is also the next step, the next step of where the participation ladder is high. So again, this is not easy to be conducted, but there is, I think it's not impossible to be done when conducting it in a very proper strategy. And the last is the implementation. So implementation can be can include public participation, as for instance the community action plan, where communities are being a part of the development process. Like for instance, there are improvements of kampung area where they are the ones that actually have the role to improve the area with the funding of the government. So this public participation can be done in different stages of the design or the development process. So yeah, okay. So I think this is the last material that I would like to deliver. So we had the chance to revitalize a park in Jakarta, which is Taman Puring. And one of the researches I have conducted during my master's degree on children's play behavior was being implemented within the design. So I think this is one of the really good opportunity where we can create a safe space for children. And what we firstly conducted was to analyze the area and what kind of, positive value and negative value it has. So Taman Puring area is once a very degraded, it faces degradation in terms of environmental quality due to its place. So if people notice, it's located beside the Taman Puring, Pasar Taman Puring, which is known for the illegal, transactions of goods. And Taman Puring previously has become a place where criminals actually they stop by, and we find this very saddening because this area is very highly potential, especially because it is located near from several schools. I think I have not shown in the map, but there are 2 schools, 2 elementary school, 3 higher public schools that is actually in, I think it's complementary to the existence of this park. And that's why we took the concept of making this park a play area for children in different ages. And on the first process of this design, we visited the area and we concluded what the people need by asking the children playing in that area, and also asking communities in that area, using the area. So there are communities such as the Parker community that has been using the area as a place for practicing. And we gathered information to understand what they need as users, and we try to implement it conceptually within the design. And I think it became one of the most successful park in DKI Jakarta with, I think this is probably one of the first playground area that has the standards of a high standards of playground, because at that time, I think it was not familiar for public parks to have very luxurious playground as what, you know, if mothers are aware, usually we try to find parks which are acceptable for our children to play. And I think that's one of the most important inspiration for me as a mother, is to create better space, better safe space for my children. And in that design process, I was very honored to have the opportunity to be able to design with PSUD and the team to make this a design to be, you know, very useful for the children. So during their first opening ceremony, I think it's one of the places where people in DKI Jakarta visit, and I think seeing this is for me and for the team to undergo that process is something that is very you know, it's relieving, because it can provide a better space than before. So I think this is one of the things that designers can do, is to create a better space and better environment for the citizens in cities. So this is the community, the Parker community, that we have, you know, communicated. So one of the most interesting thing is that we were able to communicate and to exchange ideas. So they provided with design standards that they need as Parker community for them to practice, because we have no idea what they need, or the kind of standards, the thickness of the steel and the kind of materials they need to be able to use the space effectively. So I think one of the I hope that fits the criteria of our acupuncture in this sense. So this is the TOD, but do I still have time? Yeah. Okay. As I mentioned before, I think this is also a form of urban acupuncture, or as I said, a plug-in urban design that is that brings a lot of benefit to the city. So because of the congestions and also other problems in Jakarta, the government of DKI Jakarta has tried to develop a transportation system which promotes transit-oriented development. And I think this is one of the things that also triggers more public spaces and also better developments to the surrounding area. So the impact of this infrastructure, I think we can all see that this is bringing Jakarta towards a better city. So I hope these kind of initiatives and interventions can be done in other cities that needs it, because not all cities might need it. So there needs to be certain analysis and also studies in order to make it effective. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Ibu Nadya. Please have a round of applause. Right. We have a little bit of time for the questions and answers. I will take some questions first now. Oh, we have a few. Kania first, Afri, and then, yeah, if we have time, we'll take everything, but let's just go to Kania first.
Yes, okay. Good afternoon, Bu Nadya. My name is Sophia. My name is Sophia Kania. I'm a student from Architecture, Universitas Pembangunan Jaya. First of all, maybe we could say that urban designer is someone who collaborate all regulation needs of public community, the desire of the implementer or maybe like a developer, something kind of like that. But something in this time I highlight the most is the relation between the urban designer with the government. So my first question is, does it mean that the urban designer has a big influence or impact even maybe in the process of making a regulation with the government? And if it's not, how should urban designers behave when the regulation issues by the government might be not suitable for the development of urban design? Because as we know in designing, as the designer, we have to take attention or pay attention to the rules. So yeah, that's all my question. Besides that, correct me if I'm wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Kania, for the question. I think this is a very interesting and also it's mostly really, it's very relatable to what I do. So as urban designers, we do have the responsibility to address public needs, but we also need to understand that there are regulations that we must comply to. But there are sometimes there are regulations that are not suitable for a certain condition, and we as urban designers have the capacity to analyze and to provide recommendations on what is best. I think the most important thing is not to be below the standards. I think we can provide standards that are higher than the current standard. So for instance, there are, I think the regulations, for instance, for the elevation of roads is 25%. I think this is the maximum. 10% is the standard for making roads that are safe, but there are a lot of roads that are not safe in terms of that kind of because of not complying in that standard. And I think urban designers can address the needs of the public by bringing the standards lower, like for instance, less than 10% of the elevation. I think something like that. Or if, for instance, like in Jakarta, having zero setback is not favorable sometimes for certain areas, but sometimes for urban designers, zero setback is required to create an active frontage. So this needs to be studied before we recommend these kind of strategies for the development. So it needs to be very carefully studied and analyze the risk, the impacts of development and so on, so that it does not bring further issues and problems in the future. So there are areas such as like conservation areas in Kota Tua, which is actually are facing problems due to the imposed regulations of setbacks, whereas in the existing condition there are actually zero setbacks because of the current condition of usually European design principles usually use the zero setback to create this kind of livable street street life and also environment. So these kind of things we need to train ourselves to be aware of. Sometimes we need to have, we need to have experiences from other countries. So that's why it's really important to.
It's good to go abroad, guys.
Go abroad, or we can do benchmarking if we can't yet travel. So we have a lot of medias right now. Google Earth,
Google Earth.
We can, we can
Street View.
utilize open sources to study cities around.
This is actually something that we experience in the urban design class. We want to redesign streets that are more transparent and have better enclosure, but the buildings are so far away from the streets, right? So it's impossible to create like a lively street life. So it's a bit unsafe. It's a bit, it's a bit sterile in the day and even during the night. So it's a challenge with the building setbacks. GSP. Building setbacks, okay, everybody knows? Okay, good, very good. Just in case. Okay, thank you very much for the answer. Do you have comments or? Okay, we'll move on to Afri and then I think we can do one more. Quick questions, Afri, okay?
Okay. Hi, Bu Nadya, I am Afri. That's a good presentation for us, urban designer, and all we know that urban designer has a lot of aspects to create the great design for urban. But my first question is, what is the most important thing to make people follow the design that created by urban designer? So because I know that urban designer had a lot of work, good work, but what if the people doesn't want to participate to that design? So I think it's not a good design. But yeah, my second question is, it has happened last time in CFW, like urban design is created in that place. What happen if there is a people intervention, and what happened to the urban place in that place? What happened? What if the people intervention? So is that the urban is not a good design or what? Or yeah, I think that's from me.
What is CFW?
It's the Citayam Fashion Week.
What?
Citayam Fashion Week.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's it from me. Is that clear or no?
Can you repeat the question? So what happens when we create an urban design intervention, but the people don't participate?
Yes.
That's the first one. And then the second one? Is that it? Did you forget your own question? Okay, let's just answer the first one first.
I think a feedback question to you I would like to answer, I'd like to ask is, do you think that CFW is a positive or negative response to an urban design?
I know for a fact that this is Tasha's thesis. Why are you asking the question? This seems conspirational.
For me, it's a good impact for me because urban designer is, if there's activities in there, it means that design is success. So yeah, but I guess they're causing a new issues there, I think, but in a good way, I guess.
That's okay. Yeah, I think responding to that, I think it's a very debatable topic to be discussed. But I think I agree that SFW is a positive phenomenon on how the community is able to utilize a space that has been created by the government. It's a public space that is livable and vibrant. And I think it's also being discussed among the urban designers that it's kind of phenomena that happens temporarily. It's like a euphoria that emerges by the new existence of the public space. So it's like in a way, it is like a response to a sense that the society needs this kind of space, but it does cause external factors like congestions and safety and so on. And I think it is controllable if it is managed in a proper way. But I think what we need to capture is that this kind of phenomena is a sign that the community needs a public space, more public space to be built. And if this is continued to be created in other places, like other cities, maybe in Depok, maybe it will be distributed throughout all the metropolitan area, not only in the city center of Jakarta. So I think as an urban designer, we need to respond this in various perspectives, in a positive way that they can utilize the space, but also in a negative way that it causes the safety and congestion. And in regards to the first question is what if they don't comply to the design? It means that the urban designer needs to identify the issue more, more accurately in order to deliver the design needed. And sometimes that requires public consultation, continuous public consultation, and it is tiring. But during the MRT guideline documentation, that's what we did. We invited all the stakeholders that might be affected along the corridor and simply asked them what they want. And they said they required certain incentives so that they can, they can implement what the government wants, but they also have the benefit. So it is for the government, it's just not easy for investors to implement what they try to guide, but there are tools and mechanisms such as incentives and also, like tax holiday and so on for these investors or public sectors so they can comply with the government.
Yes, thank you very much for the answers. Unfortunately, we're really limited on time. I'm so sorry, Ashila, and was it Zulfikar? Yeah. Sorry, time is fleeting and it's already 12:08 now. And this actually marks the end of our wonderful, enlightening keynote session. Thank you, Ibu Nadya, and also Professor Florian, all the way from Singapore. Please give them a round of applause. So there are a few important takeaways from our international seminar today. From Professor Florian, we learned that it's really important to understand the climate. So for my students who are doing studio design, it's not just about knowing that the sun rises from the east and sets at the west. It's so much more than that. It's about humidity. It's about knowing where the wind blows. It's about how hot it gets or how cold it gets at night, and how it affects your structure, your building shape, the materials that you use, that how everything is interconnected. And that from Ibu Nadya, we learned that urban designs is a really complex field of work. So we talked about earlier, it matches people who likes to overthink. So if you tend to overthink your design project, maybe you're suited to be an urban designer, because it's very complex. You facilitate such a multifaceted disciplinary. You have to communicate with so many different sectors. So and that you need to pay really, really close attention to socio-economical context. Now, I would like to again thank Professor Florian and Ibu Nadya for such inspiring and enlightening presentation and for sharing such valuable knowledge. I hope we can share the materials a bit later in PDF form is fine, especially to our students, to budding architects, to budding urban designers. Hopefully this will inspire them to create better projects, not just at school, but also afterwards when they go on and like in their careers and be policy makers, architects, urban designers, whatever it is. And we all learn very much, especially me, actually, including me. And we hope to have further opportunity to discuss with both of you in the future. So thank you again very much for all the audience, for asking questions, for listening rapidly to this international seminar. And it has been such a pleasure to moderate today's seminar. And I give the time back to Gozi.
Thank you very much, Kaisa. And what a wonderful seminar it has been, everyone. Unfortunately, the time has come and it's nearly the end of today's seminar. And as a sign of appreciation, I would like to invite Bu Ratna to come up here to give Bu Nadya a token of our appreciation. And for Professor Florian, who is joining us virtually today, we would also like to give you a digital copy of the certificate.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Ratna. And thank you again, Bu Dania and Professor Florian. Thank you everyone for attending today, for your enthusiasm, participation in today's seminar. Let us all once more stand up and come together for a group documentation. May I please have the documentation team to help guide everyone? Could those in the Zoom session also turn on their camera for a group photo? Could everybody stand and just face towards that camera on the back? Could everybody all come down to the stage then? Everybody please face towards the camera at the back. Can the documentation team help guide everyone to make everybody fit in the frame?
Lebih sini lagi, Bu. Sini lagi.
Gini ya.
Bola. Di depan ada yang di depan. Jangan malu-malu. Ayo, terlama. Screenshot. Windows.
We're gonna have one more photo with everybody in Zoom also joining.
Okay.
Oke. Yang di Zoom kita foto lagi ya rame-rame. One, two, three. Freestyle, freestyle. Semangat berkarya. Oh, belum. We're gonna take a video. 1, 2, 3. Semangat berkarya. Semangat berkarya. Semangat berkarya. Very well, everyone. Thank you very much. I would first like to thank the guest speakers again, once and foremost, Professor Florian, as well as Ms. Nadya for attending today, as well as our lecturers, students, and all the guests in today's assembly. Thank you all for your patience, participation, and enthusiasm in this seminar. I hope today brings you all much knowledge and joy. My name is Gozi, and as your MC for today, and I would like to finally end today's seminar. See you all in the next one. Thank you once again, Professor Florian.
Thank you very much, Professor Florian, and everyone who joined us from Zoom. Thank you very much and have a nice day. Bye-bye.